everyone, it's Amy here from the blog I Think Therefore I Teach. In today's video I'm going to go over how to write a good introduction. So firstly, why is an introduction to an essay important? Your introduction is what catches your reader's attention. It's the first thing that they read. It allows them a chance to engage with you as a writer. Second of all, it's time for you to process the question, what the question is asking of you, what your line of argument is, what the key names that you might want to bring up in your essay, and for you to really look at what is the question asking me, what are the words I'm going to use throughout in my answer. Third, it allows you time to warm up to the answer to the essay that you are going to write. So my top tips for writing an introduction. You need to keep it short. We're looking at 5 to 6 lines, depending on how quick that you can write. You're looking at about 7 minutes in total for you to write an introduction. Your introduction needs to be about a paragraph chunk like that, because at the end of the day, you need to get on with the rest of your essay. Do not do a really long introduction, because at the end of the day, you actually need to start writing your structure, writing your paragraphs. Second of all, you need to engage with the words in the question. If the question uses words such as helpful, consistently, useful, those are the words that you draw upon in your introduction and throughout your essay, of course. You need to establish an evaluative tone and or your line of argument. You might not know at that point what you're going to actually argue, but you need to still establish an evaluative tone so the examiners know you're not just going to write a descriptive essay. The options for an introduction, you might wish to use a quote, you might wish to use a definition to get you started. You might already have your own introduction technique, which I'm sure will work and you can stick with that. But these are just some recommendations if you do struggle with your introductions. So let's have a look at some examples. Starting with philosophy, let's have a look at this question from the first year religious experience. Critically assess the view that personal religious experiences provide reliable evidence for a belief in God. So the 4 things you need to immediately recognise and think about. 1, personal accounts. Which personal accounts will you use in your essay? I recommend between 2 to 3. This gives you enough breadth of knowledge. This shows the examiner enough range of information that you understand, whilst not being too many that you then get bogged down in detailed description and it gets too complicated for you to write. Second of all, what does reliable mean? Reliable is the critical word in this case. So what does it mean? What does it imply? What key names will be used in your essay, so which key names will you use to discuss? Fourth, are they reliable or not? So are these personal accounts reliable or not? Are the names you're going to use reliable or not? So that is your line of argument. Let's have a look what it might look like then. So sticking with the same question, you have the 4 different areas that you need to consider. The idea of accounts, reliability meaning, the names which I've underlined, and then argument in blue. This is an example to show you the different sections and how it links together. So, Richard Dawkins, Oxford professor and renowned atheist, argues in The God Delusion that this argument from personal experience is most convincing to those who claim to have had one, but it is the least convincing to anyone knowledgeable about psychology. This means that personal religious experiences such as centuries of Ravilla, Saint Bernadette and Guru Nanak are only convincing and thus reliable to those that encountered it, whereas psychologists Freud and Feuerbach would argue from science and thus claim such experiences are not reliable. However, are such views accurate, or is the approach of William James to psychology more appropriate in supporting the reliability of personal experiences? So with this, you've got the different sections and the different colours to really emphasise how to write an introduction for that. Now, it is quite long, but that is, I'm going to show you a shorter one in a second, because I did say to keep them short. But this one is mainly just to show you very clearly how to actually write the structure of an introduction. So let's have a look a bit more closely. Rather than just going straight into Dawkins says, set the scene. If you know nothing else about Dawkins, you know he's an atheist. Tell your examiner that. So even if you just say, atheist Richard Dawkins says, it's more than just putting Dawkins. The quote is quite long. I do recommend quotes of about 10 words max for you to remember, but this one just fits very, very good to the question. You could also learn quotes, so this question could answer a question on psychology or psychological approaches. This question could be used if you're going to compare corporate with personal, etc. So it's about picking quotes that you can use in a multitude of different essay questions. So this quote is quite long, but if you have a look, there are 3 dots. What the 3 dots mean is where parts of the quote have been taken out. So at any point, if you do take out part of a quote, put 3 dots. That shows an examiner that there's something missing there that you have taken out, but they will read the quote continuously through. So Richard Dawkins, we've said he's a professor, we've said he's an atheist, in the book God Delusion, says that quote. This means you need to then engage with the quote. You need to put the quote into your own words or link the quote back to the question. So in this case, I've linked it back to the question of personal religious experiences. And by doing that, I've then brought in the examples I would use in my essay. So I've then brought in Saint Teresa of Avila, Saint Bernadette and Guru Nanak, are convincing and thus reliable. So I've linked in my word from the question with the examples that I'm going to use, and thus they, to those that have encountered it. That then links back to the quote. This idea that it is only convincing to those that have claimed to have had one. Whereas psychologists Freud and Feuerbach, once again I'm linking it back into my quote. Freud and Feuerbach would argue from science and thus claim religious experiences or claim such experiences are not reliable. Once again, always drawing upon that word from the question. However, this is then where I establish my evaluative tone. I haven't got off the fence, I have not said which way I'm going to argue, but I'm still establishing a tone of evaluation. A rhetorical question often works very well for that. However, are such views accurate, or is the approach of William James to psychology more appropriate in supporting the reliability? Once again, using that word all the time. And so from this you can see that not only am I linking my introduction back to the original question, I'm also finding ways to link in the quote into the rest of the answer. And so do not use a quote unless you are going to actually link it into your introduction. Do not use a quote and just put it in there and think, oh, it'll do. You have to do something with it. Let's have another look at the same structure, different question for ethics, but slightly shorter as well. Situation ethics is too subjective to ever work as the basis for moral decision making. First thing you need to do is you need to recognise moral decision making. Moral decision making, in this case situation ethics, means euthanasia. Subjective and to ever work, they are your critical terms. They are the terms the examiners would expect you to use throughout, so that's your line of argument. Is it too subjective or not? So let's have a look. Wayne Dyer, American author and philosopher, famously said, "Live one day at a time, emphasising ethics rather than rules." This too is the focus of situation ethics, moving from a legalistic standpoint to focusing specifically on the ethics of agape love. However, is this approach too subjective to ever work in relation to decisions surrounding euthanasia? And who is making the judgment on what it means to be too subjective? Now, at this point, if you wish to get off the fence to show the examiner your line of argument, you could write a sentence something like this. Now, this is getting off the fence in a critical sense. You could get off the fence in a supportive sense. So you could write something like, ultimately, situation ethics does not work in relation to moral decision making due to the lack of rules and guidelines inherently missing. That is optional, though, if you do wish to get off the fence immediately in your introduction. Let's have a closer look then. Wayne Dyer. I had no clue who Wayne Dyer was. No clue whatsoever. So when I found this quote, what did I do? I Googled him. I found that he was an American author and a philosopher. So this is not something that you can do in your exam. This is something you have to prepare previously. So you need to get your quotes ready. You need to know who said them and who they are that said them. And so Wayne Dyer, American author and philosopher, said that quote. Now that quote for me, when I read it, linked into situation ethics. This idea of focusing on ethics rather than rules is the aim of situation ethics, moving from that legalistic following laws to following the ethics of agape love, being the only one universal law that you should follow. And then I bring in my evaluation. So I've shown the examiner I do know about agape, given a little bit of a drop in of I have some knowledge about situation ethics straight away. I'm then bringing in my evaluative tone. I'm showing the examiner I recognise situation that has to be linked to euthanasia, but it's also a reminder to me, so that if you then get into your answer, you then go back and read your introduction, you think, oh, agape, I've missed it. You can then bring it into your answer. Or you think, oh, euthanasia, need to bring... So it's a bit like a plan as well. It reminds you what you need to talk about. And by once again finishing on this rhetorical question, you are setting that evaluative tone. Finally, a very nice thing to always do is to look at this idea here of who is making the judgments on too subjective. You can raise that in your essay. You can question that. Who's deciding if something's valid or not? Who's deciding if it's too subjective or not? Who is making that decision? Questions like that are very, very good in an essay. So let's have a look at one more example from Christian thought. This Christian thought question is one from the A2, so this is the second year. This is one to do with gender and theology. Daly's Unholy Trinity makes valid points about sexism and patriarchy. So once again, you have the name Daly, you have her argument from Unholy Trinity, you have your critical word of valid, and you have the key parts there about sexism and patriarchy. So, Helen Gardner, American author and political feminist, once said, "This religion and the Bible require of a woman everything and give her nothing. They ask her support and love and pay her with contempt and oppression." This resonates with the messages presented by American radical feminist philosopher Mary Daly, who in her Unholy Trinity argues that God has castrated women, resulting in contempt and oppression. However, are her extreme views on sexism and patriarchy within the church valid, or present closed-minded bigotry? This follows the same structure, but I've just taken out the colour so you can see how it would look. Helen Gardner, once again, I've put a little bit of background for her. I've then given the quote. I have then linked the quote into Mary Daly. This idea that Mary Daly follows this idea of contempt and oppression by arguing that the Unholy Trinity castrates women. And then I've linked it back into sexism and patriarchy again, once more with the question, saying, is it valid, using their critical word, and then establishing that evaluative tone of, or is it closed-minded bigotry? So the same structure has been followed, all linking in from the quote back to the question in order to show the examiner I have knowledge, I know what it is that I'm going to talk about, and it's a good way to start an essay. I hope you found this video useful. If you have any questions, please put them in the comments underneath and I'll try and respond as quickly as I can. Otherwise, you can find more information on the blog. Finally, if you would like to keep up to date with the different videos, don't forget to subscribe. Thanks everyone.